So my number one fantasy team has turned into the San Francisco 49ers. We've gone 0-3 in the past 3 weeks. We need to break that streak. That's what I'm here for today, is to give myself a pep talk and to help us get through the rest of the season. So without waiting any longer, let's get into my week 10 fantasy sit starts. My first start is rookie Tank Dell, and this is kind of a no-brainer at this point, coming off of the performance that him and his counterpart rookie CJ Stroud had against the Buccaneers. I mean, Tank Dell had 2 touchdowns, 6 receptions, and 114 yards, including the game-winning touchdown over the Bucs, and I think he was the receiver of the last 2 passes to set up that game-winning touchdown with only 10 seconds left in the fourth quarter. That game was so entertaining, probably one of my favorites of the season so far, but I think coming off of that kind of momentum and that high of an incredible game like that. And now they are playing the Bengals, who seem to be back in midseason form. Joe Burrow has returned as Superman. They're looking good right now. But also they do have some injuries in their wide receiver core, so that's something to pay attention to as well when you are setting your lineups. I know that Jamar Chase, he did not practice on Wednesday, and also T. Higgins was questionable. So pay attention to those when you are setting your lineups. But anyways, I could see Houston kind of trailing maybe in the first half, and then, CJ Stroud, he always comes up in the clutch. That's why I do like Tank Dell in this matchup, because they are the one-on-ones together. They are a duo that I really like. They're a great stack as well. Even though Cincinnati, they are allowing the 22nd most passing yards per game, I do think this is a perfect opportunity for Stroud to exploit that. And I think at 5,500 on DraftKings, I would start Tank Dell. He seems like a great matchup. My next start is James Cook, running back in Buffalo. And now this is technically my risky start of the week. Last week, kind of nailed it with Ramondre Stevenson. He dropped 22.6 fantasy points, which is the most on his season so far. He had 87 rushing yards and 1 long rushing touchdown that pretty much boosted his score. Now, I kind of think that was more of a unicorn performance for Stevenson, because his production has just been down the entire season, and the entire Patriots offense has been insanely inconsistent and sad, honestly. Sorry, Patriots fans. It's been sad. But hey, a win is a win. I don't think Stevenson's a lock this week, but last week a win is a win. We'll take that. But now back to James Cook. And now this isn't the most risky start, but I'm considering it my risky start of the week just because James Cook has only had 19 fantasy points twice this week, and the rest of the weeks have been 14 points or below. Last week he had less than 10 points, and same with the week before. And just overall, he's pretty much trending exactly the same way as the Buffalo Bills offense is. Very inconsistent, very all over the place, kind of missing the marks that we expected them to. Yes, their defense is dealing with a lot of injuries, so yeah, that can carry over to how much better that the offense has to play, and they're not doing that. So that being said, though, they are going into a matchup against Denver, and Denver is on paper ranked 32nd in almost every single metric. Now they're allowing 154 rushing yards per game to running backs, and to put that into perspective, the best run defense in the league is the Eagles, and they're only allowing 66 rushing yards per game to running backs. So yeah, that's a lot more Denver, but if any team is going to exploit this, I think it'll be Josh Allen and the Bills. Josh Allen will probably be out there using his legs like he always does, but I definitely like James Cook in this matchup, and I could see him reaching the end zone in this game. Now, my next start is just plain and simple. It's a piggyback off of the first one, CJ Stroud. Now, he's only $6,900 on DraftKings, and that's what I like specifically about this start, is because, you could pay up for someone like Lamar or Josh Allen, but why do that when you have CJ Stroud, who is probably going to throw plus 300 yards going into this game against Cincinnati, and he's only $6,900, so you can save some salary there. And all of the Stroud haters in the offseason, they have completely shut up. He is a guy. This guy, if he wasn't a guy before, he has become a guy after his performance last week. He dropped a measly 420 yards, 5 touchdowns, 0 picks, and 147 passing rating, and a whopping 44.8 fantasy points. Bro, this guy is him. I'm a big fan now, big CJ Stroud fan. And now this isn't going to be a super easy matchup against the Bengals, like I said, with Tank Dell. But they do rank 22nd against fantasy quarterbacks, a little bit slightly worse than average. But again, I really like Stroud in the clutch. We saw that plain and simple in the game last week against the Buccaneers when he scored the game-winning drive touchdown, passing to Tank Dell with only 10 seconds left in the fourth quarter. What more can you ask for from a rookie quarterback to lead that kind of drive in the clutch? I just really like him in that situation. And now for my sits of week 10, kicking it off with Zay Flowers. And now this one was a little bit back and forth for me. I originally had him as a start, and then I kind of dived deeper into the past couple games in their last matchup, the Ravens versus the Browns, and I don't like it moving forward for week 10. The Browns defense, they're ranked 23rd in the league against opposing wide receivers, and they have allowed an additional 2 points to a wide receiver's average, but they also have allowed the least amount of passing yards per game to date today. So that is just a stat that I don't like a wide receiver matchup going up against. And now the last time these two teams met, Lamar just cooked them. Plain and simple, he cooked them. He had 2 passing touchdowns and 2 rushing touchdowns, and they beat them 28-3. But Zay Flowers was not involved in that at all. And I think a big part of that is when you're playing against the Browns D, you really have to scheme against them. And so a lot of the times Lamar would just take the ball, and that's kind of how they end up crushing them. And so I think a lot of the offensive production is just going to go straight to Lamar. And also Flowers' performance last week was the second week in a row that he was held under 20 yards. And he only had 1 reception last week. He had a season low 2.1 fantasy points, and he's only reached the end zone once this season. And that wasn't even early in the season. It was like halfway through. We were like, yay, go Zay Flowers. He finally made it, which makes me kind of think that they were like force feeding him the ball, and he just hasn't been able to get in the end zone any other week. So I just don't like his chances there. I just think it's safer to fade him against the Browns. My next sit, and George Pickens, this is how I feel about George Pickens. I feel like it's kind of like a brother and sister relationship where I'm like, yeah, go get him, George Pickens. You're going to kill it. And then I play him and he drops 1.9 points and -1 yards last week. So fun fact, quick story about George Pickens. Right when I started this YouTube channel and I made a 2022 rookie wide receiver kind of preview for this upcoming season, I put him on my list. He was number 5. And this guy commented saying like, how could you do that? How could you make George Pickens number 5 on your list? This is why I like to think that I know what I'm talking about. This is why I've kind of predicted what George Pickens was going to do. That comment has hence been deleted because I think the guy kind of saw how the season was going, really wanted to find it so I can make a video about it. But anyways, this is example why George Pickens is on my sit list. He's just been extremely disappointing to me this season, and I expected him to explode from his rookie year, and we just have not seen that happen. And a lot of that reasoning is because he's been making mistakes. I mean, we saw he couldn't get his toes down in the end zone, and I'm surprised he even called it a touchdown, but when they reviewed it, he was clearly out of bounds. He didn't get that second foot down, and it's just stuff like that where it just really held him back. And he only had 2 receptions and again, -1 yards for 1.9 fantasy points last week. And just plain and simple, his production has gone down since Deontay Johnson is back in action. And Johnson's just taken back that wide receiver 1 role. And now, despite the criticism for the Green Bay Packers, who are 3-5 and yada, yada, yada about how their season is going, their defense is actually performing pretty well. And a lot of the concerns are on the offensive side. They are holding offenses to an average of 196 passing yards per game, which is the 9th best in the league. And they're also the 8th best defense against wide receivers in fantasy, subtracting about 5 fantasy points for a wide receiver's average. And so I don't like George Pickens in this matchup, and I think he should warm your bench this week. And on my next sit, this is more specifically for deeper leagues, or if you're trying to decipher between who you should play in your flex spot or your super flex or on daily fantasy. If you need someone to save you salary and you're thinking about this guy, just don't start Joshua Kelley. This is a shout out to the guys that picked him up when Austin Eckler was out, and they're still playing him. Please don't anymore. He's only averaging a sad 6.1 fantasy points per game. He only scored 3.2 last week and 2.1 the week prior, and he only has 2 touchdowns on the entire season. And he's pretty much just an insurance policy for if Austin Eckler goes out. So yes, stash him on your bench, but Eckler, he's looking pretty nice right now. And it's just the Keenan Allen show. Those are the only 2 offensive weapons that the Chargers really have right now, especially because Joshua Palmer is on the IR and he has a sprained knee and he probably won't see the field the rest of the season. So you just don't think Joshua Kelley is a good place to play this week. Now for my honorable mentions, and these guys, they're ones that you would think to always start, but I'm talking more of a daily fantasy situation here. But Breeland Hall versus the Raiders, this is a matchup you can 100% exploit. Now Breeland is not the most expensive on the slate. He's not necessarily a value play, but going against the Raiders defense that has just been a field day for running backs, I think that this is a great position to play him in. Now the Raiders defense is considered the easiest defense to face in week 10, and they've allowed about 8.1 fantasy points per game to opposing running backs. And in a Jets offense that hasn't been able to consistently create a great passing game, they've kind of been all over the place. Zach Wilson is doing Zach Wilson things. I definitely think they could default to using Brees on the ground, especially because he's so talented. And so I definitely like this matchup going forward. Only 6,700 on DraftKings, so not the cheapest, not the most expensive, but I definitely think he should be in your fantasy lineups. Now, matchup to not play this guy against is Devonte Adams, and I would never tell you to bench Devonte Adams because I do love him, but after the turmoil that's happened with the Raiders and him only having one reception in the Monday night game against the Lions, his production is all over the place and he's getting cold hands because he's not getting targeted at all. And I just don't like the inconsistency that I'm seeing from who I consider one of the best wide receivers of our generation. But now the main reason I'm putting him in my sit list is because they're playing against the Jets, whose secondary is pretty much ranked first in the league. Their defense is first against wide receivers fantasy-wise, and they are subtracting roughly 15.9 fantasy points from a wide receiver's average, which is a huge mark, and we just simply cannot afford to lose that many fantasy points. We can't do that. Plus, again, with the way that Adams' production has been, he only had 4 receptions last game for 7.4 fantasy points and only 1 reception the week prior for 2.1 fantasy points. It's too expensive for this slate, and he's easily fadeable this week. And lastly, I think that DeAndre Hopkins is a great play in either in your season-long fantasy or daily fantasy because he's playing against Tampa Bay, who was ranked 31st worst against fantasy wide receivers. And specifically, I ate my words a couple weeks ago when I said fade D-Hop, and I was very serious about it. And then he dropped 31 points on my head and scored 3 touchdowns with Will Levis as his quarterback. So this, D-Hop, I'm sorry. I'm not going to fade you anymore. I swear. This is personal now. So go ahead. Start D-Hop. Do it for me, please. But yeah, that was personal. Anyways, that's all I got for my week 10 sit starts. Again, please comment if you have any questions. I'm very stoked to see how this week goes. Please get some wins, and I will catch you next week.